Throughout generations, we get this idea of the artist as layabout who doesn't have to actually do anything in order to be great. The reality is that for an artist to be successful, it's extremely hard work. You are a small business owner, and you have to learn the skills of being a small business owner. You have to not only know how to draw or paint, but you also have to know how to, ask for a sale, and you need to know what it takes to put a good website together, and you need to go do the work of talking to people about your art and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually not that hard to learn it. You just have to put in the work.
This is the Pencil Kings podcast. Cory is not a visual artist himself, but he works with a ton of visual artists. I found him recently at his website, theabundantartist.com, where he's helping artists to sell more online and basically be better business people.
I'm just going to turn it over to Cory to tell us a little bit about how you're helping artists and how you're working with artists.
Sure, of course. Thanks so much for having me on, Mitch. I think you're doing a great job with this podcast here. I think you guys are doing some great work here. Basically, what we do over at The Abundant Artist is we teach artists to dispel the myth of the starving artist by teaching them how to sell their art, how it actually works. None of the BS about, artists have to starve in order to make great art or any of that kind of stuff. Like, there's the mythology of being an artist, and our goal is to get rid of the mythology and show people that it's just like any other business. There are certain steps you have to take in order to be a financially viable and successful artist.
And what would you define as a successful artist? Because I feel like this is a term that a lot of people are throwing around. Even just saying this question, I don't think I've spent enough time thinking about it myself. But to you, what is a successful artist?
That's a loaded question, because there's financial success, making enough money to cover your bills and live a life that is relatively of ease, free of poverty, that kind of thing. And that number is a little different for everybody. I know artists who are fine getting by on, a couple $1,000s a month, and they live alone in their studio apartment somewhere. And artists who are married with a family and 7 kids, and they've got, that huge responsibility, and they're making a living doing that. So it ranges in between whatever your situation is. But as far as being a successful artist in a wider sense, again, that's different for everybody. Some artists, they're not out there looking to make money. They have a message that they're trying to convey. Maybe they're political artists, and they they have something to say about what's happening in the political world, or maybe they're trying to raise awareness about certain issues, about maybe what's happening in Tibet, or pollution of the oceans, that kind of stuff. And their goal is not monetary. Their goal is to get more eyeballs and to get people to take action around certain things. And I work with some of those artists too. But our primary goal at The Abundant Artist is to help those artists who want to make money understand how to do it.
What is sort of the number one thing? I mean, you talked about the myth of the starving artist, and I'm completely on board with that being a myth and something that needs to be dispelled and destroyed, frankly. But what's sort of the number one thing that you see with people that come to you and where you're going to start helping them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think fear is the big thing. Fear of failure, fear of trying and not making it, fear that they won't be taken seriously as an artist if they make money, if they appear to be trying to make money. It's really silly, because there are a number of very successful artists who are taken very seriously, who became wealthy in their lifetimes, but we sort of ignore those artists and look at them as freaks or anomalies. But there are patterns. If you look at every financially successful artist, there are patterns that you can follow. Our society has this story that's been handed down over generations. I've tried really hard to trace this story back to where it comes from. One of my favorite origin stories for the myth of the starving artist is a guy named Henry Murger, who was a writer in 19th century Paris. And this was when the Bohemians were first moving to Paris, and they were sort of living on the outskirts of Paris and in the poorer neighborhoods. And Henry Murger was a writer who, he didn't go to college, wasn't trained or any of that kind of stuff. But he wrote a book about his Bohemian friends who were trying to be artists and painters and things like that. And the problem for all of them is they didn't have any training either. None of them had gone to art school. But in the book, he made them out to be these set apart souls, these people who were better than all of the other people around them because they were artists. And he set them up as these sort of demigods. And it's really funny because in the book, these artists, even though he makes them out to be great people, their day-to-day actions, they don't actually do anything. They don't try to get better. They set themselves up as painters, but they don't actually paint every day. And in the intro to the book, Henry Merger, he says that Bohemia is a phase of life. It's at the beginning of every artist's career. It's something they go through while they're sort of figuring out who they are as an artist. And it's a temporary stage of poverty. And from there, you're supposed to, the way he puts it, you're supposed to move on to either the academy, which is where professional artists went, to become professionals in France at the time, or the Hotel Dieu, which is the morgue, or the hospital. And so he's sort of making the point that this starving artist stage is a temporary stage. And the interesting thing about the book is the book was his only success, and it became wildly successful. And to the point where French aristocracy would go out to the Bohemian Quarter and dress down, dress like poor people to be cool and trendy and hip, like the Bohemians in his book. And the book went on to inspire a stage play, which then went on to inspire the opera La Boheme, which of course became Rent, and so it became this icon in popular culture of what it means to be an artist. But what he was actually doing was depicting artists who are at the very beginning of their careers, who don't know what they're doing and refuse to do the work. So then throughout generations, we get this idea of the artist as this layabout who doesn't have to actually do anything in order to be great. And the reality is that for an artist to be successful, it's extremely hard work. You are a small business owner, and you have to learn the skills of being a small business owner. You have to not only know how to draw or paint, but you also have to know how to, ask for a sale, and you need to know what it takes to put a good website together, and you need to go out and go do the work of talking to people about your art and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually not that hard to learn it. You just have to put in the work. It just takes a lot of time.
And so once somebody realizes this and they come to the conclusion, it's like, yep, I've come to grips with my fear, and I realize that I am just my own business. I don't know if it's the way that you said it or something, or maybe it's my own hesitation and my own fear that's like, oh my God, that sounds like so much work. I'm never going to have time to create when I'm busy wearing a suit. And I know that's not what it is, but that's like literally what I feel right now.
You want to be an artist, but you're afraid of work. You should just give up now, because it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to start a business. I came into this sort of in a sideways manner. I went to theater school and have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in acting, and all my friends are artists and stuff. And I fell into this because my first post-college survival job was working for an internet marketing company. And then all my artist friends were like, how do you use Google? How do you use Facebook? All that kind of stuff. And I started writing blog posts about it. And then I started thinking, okay, well, how are other creative people using this? So I started interviewing artists and creative people and saying, how are you making a living with the internet? And I started putting all those, that's how I got into this. And then I started teaching classes about it. And it is a lot of work, just flat out, being a professional artist is a lot of work, just like being a professional business of any other kind, right? But there's a method to it, and you have to give yourself a ramp up time. Most artists, once they sort of understand the basics of what they have to learn, once they start implementing it and going about it seriously, it takes anywhere from 2 to 5 years to really start to see a serious income from your art. That's just sort of the way that it works, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, and you have to find your audience. So all of that takes time.
I have something more, something none of your dry as dust professors and routine-ridden doctors have. Love, devotion, passion.
You find time to create once the business starts to have momentum. You go to art school, or if you're self-taught, whatever, you build your skills up to a certain point, and then once you get serious about becoming a professional and getting paid for it, I like to implement what's called the 50-50 rule, where 50% of your time is creating and the other 50% of your time is working on the business, marketing yourself, reaching out to, galleries, reaching out to, the people at the various companies that hire you. You need to spend about 50% of your time on the business side of it in order to grow your business to the point where you're making revenue.
And I love that you just said that. And I know that for me with Pencil Kings, I'm guilty of not following the 50-50. I tend to bury my head in trying to make the site as good as it can be and trying to improve the functionality and participate in the community. But I should be doing a lot more reaching out. And on the flip side of that, I can see when I was trying to become a video game artist, 10 or whatever years ago, that I was following the 50-50, or maybe it was like 70-30 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I did spend a lot of time networking, reaching out to people, and I got jobs or doors were open for me, not because I was the best artist. And I see a lot of people falling into this trap, once I'm good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, the time to be networking is yesterday. What were they say? The best time to start networking was, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The second best time to start networking is today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just a really simple rule to follow.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the next challenge is figuring out what to do with that 50% of your time that you're spending on your business, right?
So somebody feels the fear and they come to grips with it and they realize that they need help. So, you pass the fear and now you're ready to take action. But do people still feel hesitation there? Is there something that you would like to say to that person that's like, all right, I came to grips with it. I'm ready to put in the 2 to 5 years. I love art. I want to do this. I hear you on the 50-50,
mm-hmm.
but I still feel some kind of resistance for going forward because I feel like you do need a coach or you need some kind of guidance. Otherwise, instead of being 2 to 5 years, it's going to be like
forever.
15 years.
Yeah.
Probably forever. You're right.
I think having a coach is helpful. Having a group of other professional artists who are also focused on moving their careers forward is also helpful. There are artist groups where it's just a whine fest where everybody gets together and they just whine and complain about their lack of career. You don't want to get involved in those kind of groups, but finding other artists who are focused and serious about what they're doing and getting together with them to exchange notes. And then there's lots of resources out there, right? Like there's my site, theabundantartist.com. We have a free course that shows you how to get started selling art online. And then we have some paid courses that take you even further along. So there's that resource. There's also lots of books out there. There's that new book that just came out, Art Inc., which is pretty good, I think, especially for your audience, Mitch. Allison Stanfield's book, I'd Rather Be in the Studio. Austin Kleon, Show Your Work, Steal Like an Artist. Those are some great books. Those are great places to start. My book comes out in spring of 2016, which will be The Abundant Artist, How to Sell Art Online and Live a Creative Life on Your Own Terms. That's the title of my coming book, being put out by HarperCollins. So there's lots of resources out there. So then you just go and find them and see what they say and then go do what they tell you to do. And it really is that simple. It's just making the time to do it, prioritizing it in your day and in your life and around your survival job that is the challenging part.
The people that you've worked with, once they start to put this stuff into action, how soon are they seeing some kind of results? Because I know certain things, it takes a long time, and then other kind of like action plans that you follow, you start to see results almost immediately, and it's like, oh my God, it's like a whole different life that's just happening to me right now. In your experience, how has it been for the artists?
Well, that's where the 2 to 5 years comes into play. If you're working a day job, you're doing stuff at night, in the evenings, and on the weekends, so that you can grow your art career. So it just takes a long time if you're in that sort of situation. If you're lucky enough that maybe you're only working part-time, I don't know if you live at home with your parents or have a rich uncle who's supporting you or something, and you can just jump in and start working on your art business full-time, you can do it pretty quick. There are artists that I know, like Anne Ray. She quit her day job and just went full at it, marketing herself full time. And she got to $100,000 income in her first year. But she's definitely the exception. She was able to quit her job and go at it full time. She had a background in marketing, so she knew what she was doing. And she got a little bit lucky. She knew what she was doing, but she also got lucky. And I'm a great believer in luck. The more I work, the more lucky I seem to get, as the quote goes. The more time you put into the business side of your art, the luckier you get, and the more opportunities seem to come up.
I feel like there's people who they have the talent, maybe the self-sabotagers, and I'm sure you've seen the self-sabotagers, and how might someone who, is a self-sabotager but they're not realizing it, how could they potentially realize that, and then I don't know if there's a remedy for it, but maybe it's just a sign where you should be looking at a different career path, or you need to change something.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a few options or a few reasons that people self-sabotage, right? I get a lot of emails from artists saying, I've wanted to be an artist my whole life, but my parents told me I had to go to school and study computer science or medicine or something else. And they have that voice in the back of their head, their mom or their dad, saying, you can't be an artist because you'll never make it, or you're not talented enough, or serious people don't do that for a living, that kind of thing. And at some point, you have to decide that you are your own person and decide that what you want matters more than that voice in your head, and that it's just fear. Maybe some of the people that you're talking about, those self-sabotagers, fail to come to grips with the fact that where they are in life is their own choices. And I'm not talking about, something happens to you, maybe you are injured in some way and you have tremendous injuries to overcome, or maybe you made some poor choices earlier in life and you are getting over addictions, and maybe you're got other circumstances that would prevent you from really going at your art full time. But I think most artists that I talk to are not in that situation. Most of them simply have not yet figured out how to understand that they are responsible for their own situation, and that they can make the changes. Only they can make the changes that are necessary. And I'm reading this really interesting book right now that it's a couple years old, but it's called Mindset, by a social scientist named Carol Dweck. Over 20 years of research in mindset. She talks about there are people who have what's called a growth mindset versus a non-growth mindset. And people who are in a growth mindset, they look at failures and challenges as opportunities to learn and do better. Whereas people who are in a non-growth mindset, when a failure happens, it's not their fault, it's their circumstances. It's, the art teacher failed me for some reason, or the circumstances didn't end up in my favor, or it's not my fault I got a flat tire. They blame external things instead of looking at how they can make the situation better and improve it for the next time that thing comes up. It's a really hard thing to do. It's hard to change your mind and change your mindset in that way. But that mindset shift is probably the number one thing that predicts whether or not somebody is going to become a successful artist. You have to, I don't know if you've seen Hugh MacLeod's illustration that says, I'm not delusional, I'm an entrepreneur.
I haven't, but I love it.
Hugh MacLeod, he runs gapingvoid.com, and he does art for big corporations like Microsoft and Rackspace and stuff like that, big tech companies. There's a certain amount of functional delusion that happens when you're an artist or an entrepreneur. You have to actually believe that you can do this thing that most people think they can't do. I don't know if it's hubris or cockiness or arrogance or just plain confidence that you have to have in order to make it. That doesn't mean that you never feel moments of self-doubt, right? Like every morning I wake up and I'm like, is this thing really going to happen? Like, I constantly deal with those feelings of self-doubt myself, but there also has to be that little bit of self-delusion that says you can make it.
Yeah. And just to speak on that point for 1 second, I think one of the things that I had read that made the biggest impact on my life was from Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author. And he had this, like, the rules of success, I think was the book. And the number one rule was take 100% responsibility for everything in your life. And I really try, so you gave the example of having a flat tire. Like in my world, I would take responsibility. So just saying like, well, in the future, what could I do to prevent this? Because it's up to me to make sure that the tire is in good condition. Mm-hmm. And whenever something bad happens, I'll be like, oh man, how could I prevented that? And people around me will be like, Mitch, you're crazy. You couldn't have prevented this. So why are you taking responsibility for it? But it is completely out of my control. But I still look at it through that lens. And I found that that's really empowering, because then I can change everything. I become the master of my own destiny. If something is not working, I can tweak it, I can fix it, I can cut it out, I can add more. There's all kinds of things that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the book, because I'm curious. When I originally reached out to you, you're like, I'm frantically busy. And when I hopped on Skype today, your subtitle was like, frantically working on my book. So, which I just kind of chuckled. I was like, oh, I hope he has time to talk today. And I'm so glad that you did, because I think this has been a really great talk. I've read a little bit on your blog and some of the success stories. Tell us about your book, who it's for, and I'm just curious.
The book is really for the people that I've worked with over the last 5 years, the painters, the sculptors, the cartoonists, the visual artists who are out there in the arena slugging it out, trying to figure out how to make it work. And the book is it's basically an accumulation of the knowledge that I've gained about making it as an artist over the last few years. I've had the good fortune of working with artists from all over the world who have been in a range from just getting started to, six-figure artists who are in galleries who want to transition and start selling their work online, and everything in between. So the book is an accumulation of that knowledge. And in the book, I talk about what various artists are doing in order to take advantage of the web. Most of these artists that I've worked with are, they have made a living for themselves outside of the traditional gallery system. They have their own fan base. They sell their stuff directly to their fans, and that's basically it. They're not in Hyperallergic or Art News. They're not in any cartooning news, but people know who they are, and their fan base knows who they are. That's really what the book is all about. It's about building your own fan base and selling to those people so that you can live the life that you want to live without having to depend on gatekeepers.
I especially like the not having to depend on gatekeepers. I like that little caveat.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, it's not necessarily easier than working with the gatekeepers. It's a different choice. And as more and more artists come into the scene, those gatekeepers are more and more pressed. They can only handle a certain percentage of the artists that are out there. So, if you take the last 10 years worth of artists that are graduating and 250,000 artists trying to get into 6,000 galleries, that's really, really tough. It's not great odds. And then there's all of the artists who didn't go to art school too. So it's really competitive to work with the gatekeepers, and a lot of galleries who will say, well, I've lost sales to the internet because people come into the gallery, they look at the name of the artist, and they go Google the artist and do the sale directly with the artist instead of through the gallery. That kind of stuff is happening more and more. So we talk about that a little bit in the book. And if you're in a gallery, you should go ahead and give the gallery owner the commission and all that kind of stuff. I've interviewed a handful of newer gallerists using the web to grow their audience and to sell the work for their artists, and sort of how artists can partner with galleries in more of a true partnership sense rather than, handing them your art and praying that something happens.
Praying for results.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy.
So is it aimed more for people who are already producing like quite a volume of work, or is it for beginners, everybody in between? Who's the ideal person to pick this up?
Yeah, the ideal person is somebody who's already either gone through art school or they have taken enough lessons and enough training that they have a body of work, at least one series that is a recognizable, defined series that you can talk about in an intelligent way, that is an intentional series. I see a lot of artists who are out there sort of dreaming of being an artist, and they paint every day, but maybe they're sort of painting the same thing over and over again, and there's not a lot of thought going into what they're making. The book's not really for those people. It's for those artists who have something to say, or maybe artists who don't know quite how to say it and have been afraid to say it. The book's for those artists too.
Awesome. And again, I think that's a great distinction. For myself, I always thought that I would be a cog in the machine when I was an artist. So although I went to art school, I didn't really identify with really impassioned artists, because I always thought, I'm going to go and work on films or games, and it's a whole different ball game. But now where I'm at in my life and coming back into doing art more as from sort of a hobbyist and as a meditation. And I'm so glad that you said this, because I feel like there is something that I am trying to say. I don't know what it is yet, but with the art that I do now, there is something that I'm trying to say about myself, even if it's only a message for myself, but there's a difference there.
Let me ask you a question, Mitch. Do you journal about your art?
No.
No. Okay. That's the exercise that I usually have artists do when we first start working together. If they're early career artists and they don't have a defined brand and they're still trying to figure out how to articulate what their art is about or what their message is, I'll usually say, okay, I want you to go make a piece of art, do it something small that'll only take you a couple of hours, not a big week-long project or anything. Stop every so often, take some pictures of the work while it's in progress, and journal about, not I used a red pencil and applied this much pressure, and I don't care about the technique. Write about what's happening to you internally while you're making it. Every artist makes artistic choices because of some emotion that they're having. The technique is the thing that you use to express whatever emotion it is that prompted you to make that art in the first place. So when you journal about your work, it starts to give you an idea of what you're really about. And after you do that a few times, you'll start to get an idea of, oh, you know what, this series is really about X, Y, and Z. And every time I've had artists do that exercise, they've come back to me and said, oh my gosh, I learned so much about my art and my process. And this is what I'm excited about. And this is what I should be communicating to people about my art.
I just have this huge smile on my face. I don't know if it's coming through in the audio, but I think that's so powerful and something that I'm definitely going to get the people inside the Pencil Kings community to start doing this, because I know that it's so interesting and there is so much to learn. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really fun exercise. And I'd be interested to see what your community does or says after they do that exercise.
On that note, I think we should wrap this up, let you get back to your book. So why don't you tell people where we've mentioned your website a couple times, but if there's anywhere else that people can get a hold of you, hit us with your details.
Absolutely. So theabundantartist.com is the best place to find me and our community. As far as social media goes, our most popular thing is Facebook. It's just facebook.com/theabundantartist. You can follow us there, but the best thing you can do is jump on our mailing list. The mailing list will walk you through, for the first month, you'll get a couple of emails a week that'll walk you through the basics of how to get your online business set up for your art. And then after that, you'll get what I think are some pretty awesome resources from our blog and our community. We interview successful artists from all over the world and talk about how they made it. So
sounds very similar. I'm going to subscribe when I get done this. And thanks so much for being on the call, Cory. We'll also have show notes from this and link to some of the books that we mentioned at pencilkings.com/Cory-Huff. So that'll be CORY-HUFF. Thanks a lot, Cory, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Truth demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.
If you'd like to know more about what we do, head on over to pencilkings.com, where we're offering professional training for artists all over the world at a price that anyone can afford. See you there.